So Melissa Main on LinkedIn posted a post about validation seeking through social media. And I've been thinking about this for 10 years because of sidewalk talk and how I listen on public sidewalks. And I'm still making sense of what that project is about for me. Um, but there's something that's been growing. I've been a therapist for over 20 years. My specialty is couples. I'm informed by psychodynamic, interpersonal neurobiology, and humanistic psychology, right? I am also at the same time not an elitist about Western psychological theory. I love to learn about global ideas about mental health. I love to learn about indigenous wisdom and some witchy shit. um, but I have really been doubling down the last 3 years because pop psychology has fatigued me. It feels a little bit like, here are the 10 commandments for how to be a good human, and you should just follow them, and then you'll get some human belonging. It also feels very shamey and pressury. Um, and I've been more interested in what actually happens in a human's body and nervous system that allows them to make change in a therapist's office. And how are psychological theories colluding with what I would call collective distortion, right? And so on Melissa's post about validation seeking, which I've written another post about, there's a really great, oh gosh, I don't have it here. Anyway, I wrote an article about validation seeking on social media, and I can attach it in the comments. I'll also attach Melissa Main's original post in the comments here too. There is something that happens even among therapists, which I find interesting, and I empathize with it. I think sometimes our culture is like, have we created a culture of fragile people that have been so bubble wrapped that they don't know how to be resilient? And should we blame Western psychology for that? At the same time, I still see people going to this other lens of, well, you should just learn to meditate or engage in transpersonal psychology so that you don't have a self and you understand that there's no self to validate in the first place. And I think about all those things and I use sometimes all of those tools, right? I don't want to deny that, but I noticed on the LinkedIn comments, I started getting agitated and other people, there was like this back and forth. And it seemed to me like there was something happening, a kind of rigidity and a power struggle happening. I could feel myself wanting to be right. And there definitely were some folks that need some more training. I'm going to just be bold here and say, I'm learning so much about interpersonal neurobiology and how we are wired as mammals. We do not learn to become resilient by going and meditating and being a transpersonally spiritually evolved person and suddenly we become resilient, right? We're going to still need someone to smile at us when we walk in the office and acknowledge our existence. We're going to still need to know that we matter. That is never going to go away. And if you're using spirituality to make that go away, then your spirituality is a one big fat defense mechanism, right? Moreover, coercive psychological interventions that say you must learn to self-regulate and calm yourself down is colluding with a society that does not have an existential belonging structure. I made this up. What I mean by existential belonging structure is that we have eroded the church, we have eroded tribal communities, we have eroded our connection to our right brain. We're so left brain dominant about getting stuff done that we now organize humanity into hierarchies of humanness, into zero-sum games, and to earning our worth to be alive. We don't feel super connected to our bodies. We don't feel connected to nature. We feel above nature even, right? And we are completely eroding our sense of collective awe and wonder. You can tell I just came back from a psychedelic retreat, right? Look, sometimes an over-indexing on self-soothing is a defense mechanism. Sometimes an over-indexing on self-regulation is colluding with this left brain dominant culture that creates hierarchies and zero-sum games. But sometimes coddling and codependence is exactly the same thing. And what is it reacting to? I made some notes. I wrote them down. I felt like I was so much more eloquent about it. The issue is we have a collective grief problem because we are trying to solve with the left brain and binary thinking faulty communal structures, and that perhaps we have made it impossible to scale collective existential belonging. I don't know. But if it's true, there's a lot to grieve, right? We've gone so far down this path of social media and left brain dominance, blah, blah, blah. The reality is that we are dependent creatures. We depend on one another, and we can't live without each other, right? Look at little babies. Just the felt sense, I think this is a psychoanalytic concept, of the free fall, of nothing holding us, right? We're terrified of our own dependence. And what usually helps humans sort of deal with that terror is that you don't just need interpersonal exchanges. That's not enough in a way. I mean, even co-regulation with another human is a band-aid for what the larger culture does not hold for us. I think about when I was studying with witch doctors in Indonesia before the Eat, Pray, Love book came out, mind you. And I was hanging out with these communities up in the volcano tops, and they had their kids there. And for them, belonging was so collective that the security in the kids was so high that they just didn't seem to need to act out enough. Now, I also could be fetishizing communalism. I'm reminded by some friends of mine that come from collectivist cultures. Tracy, you're a white girl. Don't fetishize collectivism. There's some shadow sides to that too, which I recognize. But there does seem to be a way that the only thing we have left in the global north is what I call transactional belonging. Transactional belonging is when we have to perform to belong. And we have to perform in a therapist's office psychologically by learning to self-soothe and self-regulate. And this is where I sometimes think, oh, is this where therapy is colluding with something? I realize that I was acting out a little bit when I started Sidewalk Talk. I think I've always felt this weirdness. And I think that's part of why I don't like it when people reduce Sidewalk Talk to just listening on sidewalks. And it's why I don't want to become part of these fancy nonprofits and collaborate with people, because I'm like wrestling with something really this tension between transactional and existential belonging. And when I say existential belonging, should I define that? What I mean by that is a deep belonging in our bodies, like an integrated left and right brain that makes deep belonging in our bodies possible. A deep belonging to nature. Like we are part of nature. I mean, I just went running yesterday and I chat with the trees. I mean, I feel like they're my family. The backyard is right there. I have a forest behind my house. Yeah. And that we really belong to each other, but we don't have, and all the infrastructure, it was church and tribes and third places and being in person. And now it's like, all we got is the couple and nuclear family. And that's about it. And those are even eroding, right? So now we're just like talking to our freaking LLM and AI device. Oh, kills me. And I do feel like sometimes some psychological theory is coercive. I find that some psychological interventions to teach people how to self-regulate, or spiritual interventions to teach people how to meditate and transcend the self, can be coercive, and they are defense mechanisms. And they also are not. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to get binary here. I do think that some of the reaction of the people that are saying, don't be so codependent, don't emotionally overfunction. I said this in another post. I think Mel Robbins' book, Let Them, is out right now because we over-indexed on attachment to a degree of over functioning. And so I think that's what these people on Melissa's posts were complaining about, which is, we're over indexing on that. But I even want to know why we're over indexing. Why did we start coddling kids during the self esteem movement in the 80s? I still think it was a reaction to the lack of existential belonging that our society infrastructurally just is increasingly not providing. And if we're going to have nervous systems, right, that know how to self soothe, you need two things. You need another person, and you need a community. And this idea that you can just do it in a therapist's office or even just do it with yourself, I think that's all we got. So that's what we're going to do. It's what I do with my clients. It's what I do with myself. But it's also why I sit on sidewalks, because I'm trying to make sense of what does this existential belonging and community really mean? And the last thing I'll say is, I think the conversation under Melissa's post, we were missing each other and we were getting kind of polarized. And I do think in general, I think polarization is evidence of a difficult time metabolizing grief. I think there's a deep longing to use our left brain to get out of this problem of belonging. And we're trying to come up with all these programs and ideas. And I like to think about them philosophically. I like to create them on a small scale level now, right? I'm inviting the elderly man next door to my house for Thanksgiving next week because his wife is dying and he's alone. And so I'm starting there. I'm starting small. I'm trying to be a better neighbor. How's that? I'm trying to learn German so I can be a better neighbor. I just also want to say I have 2 teenage sons, and I really also get the comments on Melissa's piece around self-responsibility and accountability taking. But my sons have learned to be self-responsible and accountability taking because since they were little, I parented in a way that didn't coddle them, right? So if they wanted a new soda when we were at In-N-Out Burger, I didn't go get them another soda. I would say, you can do it, try. But they were using my nervous system the whole time they were trying to do that themselves at 5 years old, right? They now have to make their own doctor's appointments. Sometimes they need help, or oh, I forgot what time it is. Okay, well, I'm going to text you in the WhatsApp, but you need to get there on your own, right? They're borrowing my co-regulating capacities. I don't want to go too far down that path. This is long enough. What does it mean for us to build this infrastructure for existential belonging again? I just don't know if these lipstick on a pig, shiny programs with good branding are going to do it. I love listening to Ian McGilchrist in conversation with John Vervaeke and Daniel Schachtenberg from last year, the last hour of that 3-hour conversation. I think they really took this up and it's worth listening to. But I think I've been doing sidewalk talk all these years because I have been curious about what Western psychology is colluding with when we hyper obsess about self-regulation. And I also hold it with complexity. I think people need to be responsible for themselves, but how we create that is intention inside of me. And we have a lot to learn about interpersonal neurobiology and the way mammals' brains works. We will never be the kind of people that don't need validation. And because of that, tech folks know how to prey on that. I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening.